Good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to see you all with us today. For those of you who have not had the pleasure to meet, I am Joe Worthington, and I'm the Director of Programming for FinTech Americas. And it's an absolute pleasure to welcome to you to our new program. The View from the Edge, which we're launched today, is as part of our FATV channel, and it's along with our chairman and former managing director of Harvard Innovation Labs, Chris Colbert. What is The View from the Edge all about? So today and across the next 12 months, every single month we'll be diving into the truths and tenets of successful digital transformation. Every episode will be in English. However, post-event, we will look to get the videos ready and also have subtitles for you guys to view as part of our daily and weekly dose. So, as you know, my job is to create the FATV channel. And what the FATV channel is creating new programs for you every single week on a Thursday. So what I would ask you guys to do, if you can, at the very end of this episode, is complete our NPS survey. The reason being is we want to bring you the latest and best topics we can. And with your feedback, that's how we can do it. Now, quickly moving on, I do want to remind you all that FinTech America's episodes are all based on interactivity. So we love questions. Please use the chat function on the right of your screen where it will say stage chat. My colleague, Camilla, will be commenting in there to let you know where to ask. And if you've got any questions around streaming, voice, audio, any issues, please let her know in there. So before we get going, make sure that your profile's updated, make sure you ask us questions, and then we'll get to it. So now I'm delighted to hand the stage over to my colleague and our Chief Growth Officer, Maria Mancuso. So please welcome me in joining Maria to stage. Hello, Maria.
Hello, Joe, and happy birthday.
Thank you
You
very
think you're
much.
going to miss it. So, Joe is with us today, although he could take the day off, as is a policy in FinTech America, that you take your birthday day off. So, thank you for being here.
No worries. Another year wiser. Hey, Maria. Another year wiser. So
Tomorrow.
I'll leave this to you and Chris. So the stage is yours, Maria, and good luck.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be hosting the first episode of The View from the Edge. Today, we have a discussion around one of the biggest talking points across the world right now, and it is why so many digital transformations initiatives fail. So many institutions across LATAM are experiencing regression, underperformance, and bad investments. So in pursuit of this digital transformation, in fact, it has been found that 84% of initiatives fail. That in my mind is outstanding. So in order to flip the odds in our favor, over the next hour, we will be diving deep into the mind of Chris Colbert on how organizations can implement new processes, cultures, and technologies to help forge a prescription to catch up or get ahead of the competition in this digital world. So I will be monitoring all the questions that come through to us, so please ask in English or Spanish, okay? So las preguntas las pueden hacer también en español y yo me encargo de traducirlas. So without further ado, let's get Chris to the stage. Chris Colbert is the former managing director of the Harvard Innovation Lab, and he's the chairman of the board of FinTech Americas. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everybody, for attending today's inaugural View from the Edge session. Just by way of a little bit of background, I used to run something called the Harvard Innovation Lab, which is Harvard's incubator for Harvard alumni and Harvard student startups. So in any given year, we would be overseeing anywhere between 200 and 400 different startups. And ultimately, out of that experience, I came to believe that the big issue in innovation, the big issue in transformation, the big issue in trying to make anything better is a lack of understanding about the human factors involved. And that's really the punchline for this conversation, is this is about human factors. We want to think it's about technology. We want to think it's about process, but it's really about human factors. Speaking of human factors, I also came to believe that the best way to learn is to interact. One of my expressions is you don't really learn it unless you feel it. And so in that regard, I don't think me talking for 30 minutes as a monologue is actually going to help anybody figure out how to avoid digital transformation failure. So as Maria said and Joe said, we really encourage everybody to chat. We encourage you to ask questions, and contrary to other formats, I'm going to stop talking and we're going to try to answer your questions in the middle of the whole thing. We're not going to do the Q&A at the end. We want to do the Q&A as we go along. And the belief in there is it will be much more helpful to you, much more meaningful. Let's go after a dialogue instead of a monologue. So with that, let me get into this thing. We've talked about 84% fails. Here's another stat, which you may have seen. IDC, a venerated research firm, has declared that by the end of next year, there will have been almost $7 trillion spent on digital transformation. Interesting point there. That's twice the GDP of South America. It's 4 times the GDP of the Middle East and North Africa. It is a stunning number. But it goes with this other number that we've already talked about, 84%. And I argue that's probably underreported. The vast majority of these investments are not generating the expected return on investment. And so the natural human question is, why is this happening? And by the way, that 84% was from a study done 3 years ago, pre-COVID, and I think the number hasn't gotten much better. And so what's exactly going on here? From another study by CIO Magazine, they identified the top 10 or 12 reasons that digital transformation fails. And we're going to go through them one by one, because I think it's really important for everybody to get their brains around these specific, call it, causes of the failure of transformation. And just like think about this with me a little bit. The number one reason digital transformation fails, and by the way, the majority of that spending number, that 6.7 trillion, is by banks. The financial industry has been leading the way in transformation spending. So this applies very readily to anybody on the call today that's in the banking business and beyond. So the number one reason is a lack of consensus on what transformation means. So just like sit with that. That means that big companies are deciding to spend a lot of money on something they haven't actually agreed on what it is. They don't actually know what it is. And a corollary to this, in the professional development group of FinTech Americas, in our conversations with clients, prospective clients, about their desire to improve their digital transformation effort, one of the first questions is, how do you measure it? And more often than not, the answer is we don't know. We haven't figured that out. And I think the measurement issue and the definition of what it is go hand in hand. Number 2, lack of CEO sponsorship, which I extend to lack of leadership sponsorship. So one of the dynamics we've also seen within the professional development group is there's a disconnect between what the C-suite wants to do or thinks digital transformation is, and what the board wants to do and thinks digital transformation is.
Chris, Danielle, Danielle already asking exactly what are the more frequent reasons that explain this 84%. So, okay, this is what we are. Thank you, Danielle. This is what we are exactly.
Yeah, we're going to go through that. That's exactly the right question, and we're going through this list of reasons, and then there's a whole other list of reasons. But the point here is the lack of alignment at a leadership level in terms of what digital transformation is, why we are doing it, what the expected benefits are. Obviously, how can you succeed at something if the leadership of the organization hasn't agreed on the fundamentals? Lack of focus. And I think these all sort of go together. You know, it's a thing, it's a shiny object. We're going to invest in it, and then we're going to go over here, and then we're going to go over here. And I'm going to say to you in a few minutes, this thing is not a thing. This thing is a forever undertaking. This thing is an infinite proposition. And if you don't focus on the capacity of your organization to change, and more specifically to adapt, I argue within a certain number of years, and maybe decades, you will be out of business. Point 4, right? I mean, the funny thing about the transformation word is it means change. Mm-hmm. So the reason why organizations fail at change is because they're resistant to change. Because you have to also remember, an organization is nothing but a collection of people. Sure, you have technology. Sure, you have desks, you have windows, you have carpets, you have policies. But at the end of the day, its ability to change is a function of the people changing. And so if the people are resistant to change, the organization will not change. It's fundamental. Trouble with what and how transformation is, I think that goes to point one. We don't know what it is. Lack of pace, which is we're slow. And the problem with the transformation game is it's really, really fast. We don't have the right people. Back-end focus, which is my view on this, is infrastructure is easier than interface. You can rebuild your infrastructure and go to the cloud without understanding consumers. The problem with interface, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, you actually have to understand them. And they are not you. So it requires a level of intimacy that is uncomfortable for most organizations and most individuals. So they go to the back end because the back end is a bit more black and white. You know, moving from central servers to the cloud, there's no humans involved. It's largely a technology and process game. Integration woes, that's a systems issue. Digital moat, strapped for cash, not enough money, lack of continuity. The point is the things in white are all human issues. They're not technology issues. They're not money issues. They're not even process issues. They're really human and specifically behavioral issues. But the big one is this, right? You can't change an organization unless the people are willing to change, because the organization is nothing but the people.
Oh, I have a great question. Sorry, from Braulio, that he says, okay, how do you control that the client does not change their expectations during the delivery? So yes, I imagine when you start designing a product, then, well, maybe, the appetite for that product then may have changed. Or
how do you control the client from changing expectation? Is that the question?
During the delivery?
I would argue if the client changes expectations, then there wasn't sufficient rigor on the front end to define exactly why we're doing it and what the measures of it are. And I think there's a level of rigor. I mean, one of my other observations is most organizations suffer from a gross lack of rigor. That this stuff is hard, really, really hard. And so I think you need rigor on the front end to say, what exactly are we seeking to transform? Why are we seeking to transform it? What are the measures of it? How well do we understand the stakeholders involved who are going to be impacted by it? What is it going to take in terms of the organization's adaptive capacity? We'll talk about that in a second. There are a ton of really hard questions that have to get answered before you pull the trigger on a new technology or hiring a partner to help you rebuild a system. And most organizations don't have the wherewithal to apply the rigor, so they jump the shark and they start investing and they get 25% in and they're like, wait, we forgot this, or wait, we should have done this. And so they change expectations. So
but Chris, can be also that in a way banks were not accustomed. That's not their way to work. They generally used to deliver the products and then expecting the customers to accept or to adopt those products. So this has been changes. Banks traditionally didn't operate like that.
It's funny that you say that, because Joe sent out a piece this morning to the team across FinTech Americas about open banking, and I don't know if you got a chance to read it, but I read the whole thing and I thought to myself, banks are still doing what banks have always done, which is what you said, Maria. The focus is on creating products. And I think that's the wrong focus. I think the focus needs to be on creating experience that adds value to the customer. And when you change the focus, it becomes harder, because all of a sudden you have a new set of questions. Who is the customer? What is value? But in the product mentality, which is where they have been, it's easier. But the problem is it's not sustainable. The things that we create are going to have to be recreated because they're not good enough. So I think it's all, to me, a matter of rigor and a matter of dimensionalizing what exactly a bank is. We'll talk about that later. And
also, Jerry here asking us a question. What about technical debt of years and years of it? How does it affect the agile transformation? So, well, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you can answer that question. It's back to sort of strapped for cash. You've got this technical debt that you're trying to write off over time, and meanwhile you're like, oh my God, we have to spend X amount of dollars on a whole new platform, and all new systems and new, and it's a crushing thing. But it's kind of I don't think it's a choice. I mean, you can pretend that this transformation thing is going to go away, and when we've seen banks do this. They think it's the cause du jour. It's the shiny object of the day, and a year from now it'll be replaced by something else. And I think this is not total quality. This is not customer centricity. You see in the history of corporations these little bursts of trends, topics that everybody jumps on the bandwagon, and then a year later the sort of bandwagon's over and they move on to the next thing. I think the problem here is if you don't transform, you die. So yes, the technical debt thing is real, but I don't know what the choice is. Although I will say, if I was running a bank, I wouldn't spend a ton of money until I had a lot of everything else figured out. I wouldn't, and I apologize to the technology companies on the call, but I wouldn't jump into new technologies until I applied the rigor of really understanding the value that we're after for the customer, for the corporation, how we're going to get there exactly, what the systems design was going to be, what the improvements were going to be, what we're going to stop doing, how we're going to change the culture to support the new technologies. I would answer all the really, really hard questions before I pulled the trigger on a purchase order. Most banks don't do that. So let's the net of all this is that we hate change, but we got a double whammy, which is not only are we good at change, but the pace of change is far faster than our natural ability. So we're creating this gap. Technology is going woo, and humans are plodding along, kind of holding on to the way it was because that's where we find comfort. And that capacity gap is making the resistance to change even more problematic. But my view in all this is like a little mind bender here, is I think transformation is the wrong goal. And my reason for that is, if you think about transformation, it means turning something into something else, right? The problem is, in today's world, given the technology curve, given globalization, given competitors coming at us from every angle, when you turn something into something else, my bet is that something else is going to have to turn into something else.
Correct. Yes, but the thing is, yes, but
we've treated digital transformation as a thing, when in reality, what is required is this: perpetual adaptation. It's not turning something from this into that. It's changing the way of a thing to become perfectly adaptive. So we actually never talk about transformation ever again, because it's actually baked into how we are, how we operate, how we lead, how we manage, how we motivate. Like the nature of the entity itself is perfectly adaptive. Now that's counter to humans. We don't want to adapt because adaptation is a function of involves change, but I'm arguing we have to adapt. And when we think about adaptation, I go to this guy who's, everybody know, what's that?
We go to Darwin, of course, adaptation. So in a way, it's inherited to the human nature, however, in our time. But you can argue also, Chris, that in the last years, people have to adapt much more to many things. Because again, the technology, although it's still slow and we are behind, but still you adapt, because you have to adapt even to use your phone, even to...
I think that's right. I think at an individual level, we're not adapting physically or physiologically, although probably are adapting, like our necks are starting to bend forward more because we're looking at our screens so much.
Yes. Adapting to use Zoom all day.
You're right, Maria. I mean, I think at a consumer level, we've been adapting. somewhat. It's certainly adapting our behaviors to accommodate technology and leverage technology. I think at a corporate level, it's been more of a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Because corporations are collections of people, and a lot of people, well, we'll talk about in a second, are reluctant to change. Systems are reluctant to change. If you've run a bank for 30, 40, 50 years and it's been successful, the idea that all of a sudden you have to wake up tomorrow and be different, act differently, make different choices, take more risk, that's like anathema to your history,
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think humans are more adaptive through the lens of the here and now. Like, how do I use this? How do I use this thing to gain convenience in my life? We've done an okay job there. But as I contemplated basically putting transformation to bed and replacing it with this idea called adaptation, which is really a superset of transformation, I went to this story, this truth of this creature called the tuatara.
First time I heard.
The tuatara exists. It lives in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 1.5 meters long and weighs about 1.5 kilos. It's been around for 200 million years. The oldest creature on Earth. But the most interesting thing is it's the most adaptive creature on Earth. And so it has adapted in really 5 ways. It has adapted physically, actually not much. Over the 200 million years, it's considered half lizard, half dinosaur.
Mm-hmm.
It is adapted physiologically, which is to say its internal organs function differently than they did, 50 million years ago. It is adapted in terms of its purpose, which is its role in the food chain. And it has even adapted psychologically in terms of how it understands situations, how it thinks, and how it feels. But the most interesting thing about the tuatara, which applies to us and applies to banks and applies to the world, is that its most unique adaptive capacity is its ability to very quickly change its DNA. So at a most foundational level, the tuatara is the most adaptive creature in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it recognizes that to adapt, to survive, to thrive in a changing environment, you have to do it inside out. You have to do it at a DNA level. And that is the message to the people on the call today. Succeeding at adaptation, succeeding at transformation is an inside out proposition. Technology is outside in. And I'm not saying there's not a role for it. It's a critical piece of the equation. But if we can't change our DNA, like how we operate, what we do, how we feel, all the sort of dimensions of the code that defines us, I think our ability to adapt perpetually, our ability to transform successfully is almost zero. And this is a long-winded way of explaining why 84% of transformation fails. They don't get near their DNA. They treat it as a purely physical proposition, when in reality, it's a purely biological proposition.
Well, Daniel here says mindset alignment is key to adapt instead to adapt.
Absolutely. And mindset, you go back to this, mindset is a psychological factor. And I'm going to argue, well, let me go forward. So as you think about adaptation of making the LATAM financial industry perfectly adaptive, not transforming it, because transforming presumes an end. I'm talking about a perpetual capacity to change. Survival of the fittest. As Darwin said, it wasn't the biggest, it wasn't the smartest, and I don't think it's the ones with the most technology. It's the ones who learn how to excel at adaptation. And so interestingly, or not interestingly, or not surprisingly, the model of adaptation is identical to the tuatara model. The terms just change a little bit. So instead of physical, I put in technology. Instead of physiological, I replace it with process.
Mm-hmm.
And purpose, however, is the same, which is, what is the purpose of a bank? And I actually think this is another big miss across the globe. This is not a LATAM issue. It is a global issue. I gave a talk in Cairo a couple of weeks ago to the Central Bank of Egypt and the Egyptian Banking Institute And at one point I gave a talk, and then I moderated a panel, and at the end of the panel, I asked the panelists, what is the purpose of the bank? And the purpose, they all answered the purpose in a way that was exactly the way they would have answered it 20 years ago. I'm like, no.
Okay. Now I'm curious, what did they say? Loan money?
One guy said the purpose of the bank is to make money.
But okay, sometimes you have
okay.
You have to hear that.
But the purpose of a bank is distribution of capital and an enabler of commerce. I'm like, that's not enough. Mm-hmm. Because with DeFi, you're going to be out of business. Distribution of capital and enabling commerce, you don't need banks. So I'm going to argue part of the adaptation, call it recipe framework, has to be looking at our purpose, looking at your purpose. And we'll talk more about that. And then the last one, as with the Tuatara, there's a psychological dimension. Well, there's a psychological, AKA people dimension of the bank adaptation task. And ultimately it points to this. Oops. The same thing, inside out. Later on, I'll say you got to decode your organizations and then you got to recode them. We got to spend more time coding ourselves versus coding technology. Again, I am a proponent of technology, a believer in technology, but if you plow down the technology path without real rigorous consideration and implementation around these other 3 points, and particularly the people point and the purpose point, I think you fail. So everybody has heard me, I think every speech I've ever done, I have this slide in it because I view this as the decoding cheat sheet for human beings. Mm-hmm. So this is our favorite Abraham Maslow, psychologist from the 50s, studied human beings, and he arrived at this, the hierarchy of need. And his whole point is the vast majority of people live bottom up. They wake up every day subconsciously looking for food, water, shelter, seeking employment, safety, control, maybe a little bit of loving and belonging, and then a fewer number of those people rise to the next 2 levels, with very few still going after self-actualization. The problem with this, No,
I can see it perfect. Eh?
No, I'm trying to build it and it just failed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, can see the pyramid.
I'm going to have a problem. Let me see. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, if not, just take it out and we put it again and see if that works.
Hold on.
In a way, I think that our community is blessed in a way, because I think that most of our community, is looking forward to getting to the self-actualization. You are pushing the envelope, you are discovering new things, you are trying to go, and
right.
reach out to the next level. So in a way, that's, good, because it feels good.
I think that's right. I think the reason for FinTech America's being is to help organizations and individuals self-actualize. Mm-hmm. The challenge is within those organizations, there are a lot of individuals that don't seek to self-actualize, don't desire to become the most that they can be. And this kind of goes back to my purpose comment. The purpose of a bank to be a distributor of capital and an enabler of commerce. I don't think that's self-actualization. I don't think that's big enough. I don't think that's bold enough. I don't think that's motivating enough. I don't think that's sufficient value to survive. What's that?
In the safety needs that you put in the safety, well, you do the basics. No. You comply. You do what you have to do. But
yeah. So the point here is, this is the adaptation zone. If you're going to become perfectly adaptive, you're really talking about self-actualizing, realizing your full potential as a bank, as an organization, as an individual, as a leader. If you don't sort of grasp self-actualization at a motivator, I'm going to argue you're probably going to be stuck in the status quo zone, which really is the danger zone, because that's when you become vulnerable to competition, both direct competition, indirect competition, and ultimately you get pushed out of business. BlackBerry is a perfect example of somebody that that started out as an incredible innovator, first smartphone, had 24% market share, and then they ended up, because of their success, I think, falling into the status quo zone and ultimately pushed completely out of the smartphone market. So this is, the punchline is this: we don't struggle with change, we suck at change. And so as you think about creating a perfectly adaptive organization, again, I argue it's the people, stupid. Yes, technology, yes, process, yes, purpose, but I want to spend the bulk of the remaining conversation on the people part. I said this already. When I was in Cairo, speaking to about 700 people, mostly central bank and bankers, I asked them, I said, how many of you are 40 years or older? And about, I don't know, 30 people raised their hand.
Mm-hmm.
I said, in Egypt, 76% of the population is under the age of 40. Okay, so 76. So the bankers in the room and the people they serve aren't the same people. And then I said, how many of you are under 21? Nobody. And they said 50% of the Egyptian population is under the age of 21. And so my question to them, which is my question to everybody on the phone, is how well do we understand the customers that aren't like us? The whole financial inclusion thing, I think, is a perfect example. Is the people that the industry claims they want to financially include are nothing like the people that run the banks. And so how many bankers have spent much time with a rural farmer who makes $1,000 a year and doesn't have electricity or whatever? How well do we understand them? Because in order to create value for them, in order to become perfectly adaptive, we have to understand them far better than we understand them today. Point two, I already said this.
Recode. No.
Decode and recode. I mean, you think about our work at FinTech Americas over the last few years, this is what we've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We've been decoding how the organization was operating 5 years ago, and we've been recoding it. And that's why we've been so successful. But it was an inside out job. It wasn't us going, let's go, buy technology, or let's go do this. It was like in a funny way, a very intimate task, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, it's continuous, because really, from QBR to QBR, we change it again, and we reposition, and we align again.
Yeah, which is why transformation is the wrong word.
Mm-hmm.
We're not trying to transform FinTech Americas. We're creating a perfectly adaptive organization. That's the job. Remember this. This is the bell curve, and I think it's true. At least 75% of the people that work for you are actually reluctant to change, reluctant to learn new skills, learn new behaviors, take risk, think differently, act differently. And it sets up this idea of mine, which is, at the end of the day, behaviors are the root of all action, all decision, and all consequence. If you want to become adaptive as an organization, that means the people that work for you need to embrace adaptive behaviors. Mm-hmm. Period. You can't become adaptive without that truth. And so recognizing behavior as a key driver, and I think Daniel or whoever said earlier, mindsets and beliefs underpin behaviors.
That behavior, Chris, you need to hire looking for that behavior, because once the person is in, well, maybe they have it or they don't have it, or they want to change or they don't want to change according to their whatever appetite for.
Well, we've talked about this. It goes back to the bell curve. Well, let me go back to the bell curve. So 25% of the employees, if you show up tomorrow and say, guys, we're going to create a perfectly adaptive organization to ensure the longevity of the organization, to ensure professional and personal growth for each of you, and ensure you end up being able to tell an amazing story to your grandchildren, and maybe one day you'll lead your own organization. 25% of the people will jump on that with you immediately. They're like, I'm going there. I'm gonna learn new behaviors. I'm gonna learn new skills. Sign me up. 75% will hesitate. Of the 75%, 50% are movable. Mm-hmm. Are movable. We can convince them over time through management, through motivation, through incentives, through challenge, through training, through teaching, through cultural stuff. We can move them into the I'm with you place. My experience, having run many companies in my life, is 25% won't budge. And so the question becomes, what do you do with the 25%? And I argue, over time, you replace them. Because you can't become perfectly adaptive if you have a large faction of people that are against you, that are talking in the hallway about how this stuff is a waste of time, it's not worth doing, we'll go back to the way it was, the management will change, Chris will die of a heart attack, eventually he'll be gone. And so this gets to your recruiting point. I think banks particularly, but all, call it legacy corporations, really need to rethink how they recruit. And I'm not talking about outreach, I'm talking about conversion. And
Jose here, Chris, sorry to interrupt you, but Jose here is, how do we move them from their comfort zone with so many potential benefits? How do we get elephants to move?
So it's an excellent question.
To take a small risk with possibilities of a very large return for the shareholders and customers benefit.
It's an excellent question. So the first, I'll talk about this again, but let me just say it now. The first thing I would do is I would reform purpose, like the purpose of the bank or the business and the aspiration for the business, where we are trying to get to. What is our vision? What is our aspiration for the future? And how does that benefit the employees in the organization? It can't just be a corporate benefit. It has to be a human benefit. The second thing I would do is call out behavior as the critical capacity of the organization, that the way we get from where we are to where we want to be is changing our behaviors, myself included. The third thing I would do is to bring behaviors into job descriptions. And I would hire to behaviors. Most job descriptions are tasks, skills, and responsibilities. Fine. But what they don't tend to capture are behaviors. And if we believe or agree that behaviors are the root of all actions, all decision-making, and all consequence, then necessarily we need to manage two behaviors. Like, for example, we'll talk about this too. We want all managers to teach. That the ability of the organization to grow and learn is predicated on the managers of the organization being effective teachers. So one of the behaviors that we identify for the managers in our company is teaching, that their way is teaching. I'm not talking about formal in a workshop at the front of the classroom. I'm talking about a behavior of, hey, Maria, let me explain to you why this is not right, why what you just shared with me is not right, and let me show you how to make it right. In most corporations, that conversation does not happen. In most corporations, the conversation goes something like this: Maria, this is wrong, try again.
Yes.
That's not teaching. That person doesn't get better. So the big one to the excellent question, Jose, who asked that? Jose, excellent question. The big thing is making behavior the central thing we manage, the central thing we motivate, the central thing we measure. Skills and responsibilities and tasks that sit on top of the wrong behaviors will not get you where you want to go. You can have somebody that is brilliant. I've had this in my career where I had brilliant people that were expert at what they did, and they were so closed-minded, and they were so not collaborative, and they were so not willing to be taught, and they were not open, they were not, cross-lateral thinkers. They had all the wrong behaviors, even though they had all the right skills, and they failed. In my company, they failed. And so, but we can talk more about that.
Yeah, okay. No, what I'd like is if anybody in the audience, have incorporated behaviors into the job descriptions, please, share.
Yeah, I'd love to hear. I mean, I gave a talk in Panama a couple of months ago, and somebody out of the talk actually WhatsApped me the other day, and he said, Chris, we pulled behaviors into all of our job descriptions, And it's completely changing the conversation between managers and employees. Because now it's not about what you did, it's about how you did it. How you did it. So
Chris, give us an example. Why don't you know? I think it's important to give us an example of whatever behavior you would include.
yeah, hold on. I'm going to get there in a second. So the question about how do you motivate behavior change in an organization, I do think resetting purpose, establishing a vision for a future, managing people to it, motivating people around it, and this is what this is about. So how do you motivate people to change? And in my view, there are two levers. One is the lever of desperation, which is fear. So I say to you, Maria, if you don't become more adaptive, if you don't change your ways, I'm going to fire your ass.
Okay, that will keep me on my toes, and Maria will start working different for sure. Yes.
The other way is aspiration. Maria, if you change, there will be gold at the end of the rainbow. What's interesting, what I've come to believe is desperation alone doesn't work, because it might get a short-term bump in your behavior, but ultimately you're going to leave the company because there's too much threat, right? You're afraid, and nobody gives you their best work when they're purely afraid. Interestingly, the other version, which is all aspiration, Maria, change, adapt, learn new things because there's gold at the end of the rainbow. What that tends to do is people and leaders make irrational decisions. So what we actually want is a mix. We want a context that is mostly aspirational, based on this idea of possibility, the future, how we will all benefit from creating an adaptive organization, with a little bit of desperation, a little bit of fear, to keep us focused, to keep us accountable, to not go la delusional about the aspiration stuff, but be more rigorous about it. So that, and I really do believe this sort of ratio of mostly possibility with a little bit of fear, mostly aspiration with a little bit of desperation, is the right ratio to fix a company, fix a country, fix a marriage, fix yourself. So it gets to how we manage, motivate, incentivize, and measure the right behaviors. I talked about this. I talked about this too, this idea of creating the sense of possibility and aspiration for the future. I call it a motivating context. I'm gonna jump this and go to Amazon's motivating context. So at Amazon, since the beginning, they've had something called Day One. Every day is Day One, which is a way of Amazon saying, even though we're a $480 billion business, we act like a startup. Every day is Day One. We don't look backwards. We don't rest on our laurels. We hold on to the past. We are willing to challenge every part of how we do what we do to ensure that it creates more value for everybody. And the Day One principles, one is customer centricity, long-term over short-term, and risk-taking. And I know for banks, risk-taking is brutally hard. I mean, you're in the business of risk mitigation. Problem is, I would argue the risk of not embracing every day as Day One is the biggest risk you have. And so, one question for everybody is this, as you think about your organizations, are they Day One organizations looking to the future? Or they call it Day Two organizations looking to the past? By the way, America, I think, is a great example of a country that used to have a motivating context built primarily on possibility with a little bit of fear. So coming out of World War II, something was fashioned called the American Dream, which was all about possibility and a little bit of fear. And now the sad truth of the American Dream is ours is a country, the ratio is flipped, and our country is fueled mostly by fear and with a little bit of possibility. And it's what's actually really getting in the way of our ability to adapt faster. You asked the question about what are the behaviors. And so this is a to-do that anybody on the call could do. Go back to HR or just within your organization, start asking the question, what are the key behaviors? In this particular case, which I think is from my Harvard experience, there are two sets of key behaviors. The behavior of the function. So Maria is the Chief Growth Officer of FinTech Americas. What are the 5? No more than 5, because nobody can remember more than 5. what are the 5 key behaviors we need her to exhibit to excel at her job? So this is, I forget what this job was, but these are examples of behaviors: outgoing, proactive, collaborative, methodical, innovative. There's another set of key behaviors which I subscribe to, which are what I'll call universal behaviors. So in addition to function-specific behaviors, these are behaviors that we expect everybody in the organization to manifest, to adopt, and to represent. And I think I have, these are, when I worked at when I ran the Harvard Innovation Lab, the funny thing about the Harvard Innovation Lab and the team, the culture of the Innovation Lab before I got there, it was not innovative at all. People were not active learners at all. People were not trying to make the organization better than it was. And so we immediately moved into this sort of behavior-centric management mode. And I created, with input from the team, our core behaviors. And I think these could apply to every organization in the world. And I think they're worth talking through. 1, raise the bar. Raise your own bar. Make learning and development a core competency and requirement. Sounds easy, but it's not, and it's not happening in most organizations. Start with why, which is to understand really strategy. Why are we doing this? What and how are too easy to default to? Get outside. You are not in the banking business. Harvard was not in the innovation business. We're in the business of trying to figure out how to make the whole thing better. And so we have to benchmark against everybody else, not just other innovation labs. Think sideways is to break the silos within the organization and recognize that sales is connected to marketing, connected to product, connected to customer service. And we have to build bridges across the organization. Call it lateral systems, lateral thinking. And then the last one is this idea: at an individual level, don't look back. Take risk, eschew legacy, and all the conventions that tend to come with that. So these 5 behaviors are in every job description at Harvard. They're actually transparency. They're also, we've adopted these 5 behaviors.
Exactly. That's what I say, FinTech Americas. And that's part of it, because then you can bring new ideas. You can see what others are doing. And that's also, as you know, part of the community. Our job is to, democratize in a way the learning and what other organizations are doing and what we can learn from them.
And to the audience, you have to remember, if you took 10 random people from your company, 7.5 of them are in the status quo zone.
Mm-hmm.
Only 2.5 of them are naturally pushing towards self-actualization, wanting to be more adaptive, wanting to transform themselves. And so absent articulating the required behaviors that you were holding them accountable to, absent managing that, motivating that, incentivizing that, rewarding that, challenging that, those 7.5 people won't move into the other group. It will not happen, which means your organization will not become perfectly adaptive. If you buy the adaptation thing, then the next natural thing to do is, well, how do we measure? We need to measure it beyond the sort of standard measures, financial measures, product measures, cost of acquisition measures, marketing measures, sales measures. Mm-hmm. We're saying we need to become a perfectly adaptive organization. So measure it. And the measures here are harder to measure, but they're still possible to measure. So as an example, imagine you had a dashboard that was measuring learning growth across the organization. Mm-hmm. Measured risk-taking, measured alignment. How aligned does every part of the organization feel with the purpose of the organization, the vision of the organization, the motivating context? How well aligned do people feel? Because when people are out of alignment, they will not be able to adapt. How much trust is there in the organization? Do people feel trusted, and do they trust the people they work with and for? A lot's been written about this thing called psychological safety. If you don't know about it, I encourage you to read about it. It's something that Google came upon in a big research study years ago. But the fundamental truth is people will not take risk if they operate in an environment of distrust. If they do not feel psychologically safe, they will not step forward with their ideas. They will not be okay challenging convention. They will not be okay disagreeing with managers. They will not be okay taking risk. And then this other thing, and this relates to purpose in America, and I don't know that this is true in Latin America. There's a recognition that the corporation is a whole human proposition, and part of the responsibility of the organization is the well-being of the people that work for it, not simply their paycheck, but how they feel, whether they are motivated, whether they are able to realize their aspirations. And I think in an adaptive organization, measuring well-being is a critical part of that. Just to sort of wrap up, I know we only have a few minutes left. This is a big one, and I will say to you when I present this, I think a lot of people are like, hierarchy. Hierarchy has existed since the first nomadic people began assembling in villages. Mm-hmm. Hierarchy is near and dear to the human condition. The problem is hierarchy gets in the way of a world that is globalized, that is interconnected, and that is as dynamic as ours is. And so the walls become walls, literal walls to our ability to change, transform, and adapt. And this is I actually drew this. I always get a kick about showing this. This is like the average or the standard organization, right? Correct. I mean, ours looks kind of like this, right? But this is really what's happening. There are walls in the C-suite. The CMO hates the COO, who hates the CFO. There are walls, walls between their layers, horizontal walls between departments. There are walls everywhere, and there were walls at the innovation lab when I showed up. This department didn't talk to this department, and you got to take down the walls. It'll kill you if you don't take down the walls. There are walls between you and other people in your company. Take them down. There are walls between you and you. Part of adaptation is recognizing, hey, I need to change some things about myself. Most people aren't willing to look in the mirror. And then there are walls between us and everybody else, whether everybody else is the rest of the company or everybody else is the market we serve. That whole point about decoding customers, that's a wall. The 60-year-old Egyptian bankers not understanding the 22-year-old Egyptian consumer, that's a wall. Mm-hmm. The good news is it can be taken down. We talked a little bit about this. Remember this?
Yes.
This is the problem. Now, the good thing is corporations around the world are talking about retraining and reskilling. This is from 2018. Amazon announced $700 million to retrain a third of its U.S. workforce in new skills. My issue with that is this, right? Retraining is not enough. We actually have to teach people how to adapt. This goes back to behavior. You can retrain me on how to, I don't know, refill the ATM machine. I don't know, how to do a new process in terms of opening a checking account. I don't know. But the problem is 6 months later, there's going to be a whole new thing. Right? The shelf life of these innovations is really short. So Amazon's going to have to spend another $700 million 2 years later to retrain the people it already retrained. My whole point is, if we teach people how to adapt, part of the retraining they'll do themselves. They'll actually get ahead of it because they will understand that they have to get ahead of it to ensure that they have a long-term job. Otherwise, particularly mechanical jobs, the robots win. The whole fear about robots replacing us, to me, is an issue of we're not teaching people how to adapt. Retraining doesn't solve the robot problem because at some point the robots are much more efficient and much more effective. Mm-hmm. But if we can teach people how to adapt, that means they will evolve their capacities to create value. And by doing that, they will be able to play other roles within our companies or other companies. So it brings this question, and I've used this phrase multiple times over the last 45 minutes, perfectly adaptive. We need to create environments, organizations, and individuals that are perfectly adaptive, which is a combination of the intrinsic, this is from within. This is not me relying on you telling me, Chris, you have to learn how to adapt. You have to learn new behaviors. This is me getting it and me wanting to self-actualize with the skills and mindsets and behaviors that are necessary to continuously adapt. So the next natural question is, well, what the hell are the skills and mindsets and behaviors necessary to continuously adapt? Coincidentally, I'm on the board of a school in Dubai. It's a global school called the School of Humanity. And they are teaching high school students basically how to be perfectly adaptive, how to be ready for the world that they are going to enter. And so the construct that we created is this. And there are 5 buckets: thought, flourishing, STEM, creativity, and action. This is like a rubric. But if you just look at this, pick a few words on this chart and think about the people in your company. Can you read it?
Yes.
Think about the people in your company. Think about yourself and say to yourself, how good am I at these things? How good am I? How good am I at pick any one of them? So scientific thinking, how good am I at mindfulness? How good am I at logical reasoning? How good am I at information literacy? How good am I at these things? And what you realize is, I don't think most of us are very good at them. And so if I was putting together a training curriculum for a company, I would borrow the School of Humanities curriculum. This is what we need to be able to perfectly adapt or be continuously adaptive. And this is just a study from McKinsey that was done in 2020 that pretty much proves my point, that what organizations are calling for are really these adaptive capacities. You see on the list, critical thinking, managing of others, adaptability, continuous learning. You know, how many people in our companies right now are really great at continuous learning of their own volition? Just sit with that for a second. I don't think anybody on the call would.
Yes, and I like, if I may, last time when we do these boot camps, you know, that your certificate of education is never a diploma, it's just the commitment that the student has to sign that commits to continue education and learning new things.
Yeah. So I know we've got only a few minutes left. So one of the terrible questions I ask leaders and managers when we start talking about the importance of adaptation and creating a learning organization, and I'll put you on the spot, Maria. Maria, what did you teach for? Okay. That's the reaction. That's exactly the reaction I get. So when I ask a CEO, hey, what did you teach yesterday? Typically, he, sometimes she, looks at me like I have 2 heads. And then I'm like, okay, well, what did you learn yesterday? And there you get more response, but not much more. And the whole point is, we should be able to ask anybody at any point in time in our organizations this question, and they should be able to answer it without seizing up, without freaking out. So I sort of talked about this already, but rewriting every manager job description to call out teaching responsibilities as a behavior. And then investing in managers on how to teach. Maria, you and I have had lots of conversations about this. Mm-hmm. It's not an easy thing to do. They're all different teaching styles, or all different ways to do it. But you got to do it. You got to do something. It's also why, by the way, somebody asked me the other day about the professional development group, which we started several months ago. And the whole reason for FinTech America's creating the professional development group was this recognition that organizations need more help. That, our conferences are great. The FATV channel effectively is a learning channel. But when you get into the bowels of this stuff, the behavior stuff, sort of the truth stuff that we've been talking about for the last hour, they need more help. And so we created the professional development group as a consultative and training division of FinTech Americas to really accelerate banks, not just banks, all organizations' capacity to become adaptive. I won't belabor this because we're out of time, but this is the construct that we follow, the 7 pillars of we're going to call it adaptation. The yellow thing are behaviors. We always call them out. There's a product set we offer. We'll belabor that. But the point is, none of us are in the financial business. Even FinTech Americas, we're in the learning and adapting business. We're in the business of helping you all learn and adapt how to sustain your businesses, how to excel at your businesses, and how to ensure that 20 years from now, you're doing great. Can we 5 more minutes? We got 5 more minutes?
Yes, we do. We do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I just want to end on the purpose thing. So there's this question like, what do your employees want? So if you could go into the mind of the employee today, and arguably this is the 25% that is ready to adapt, what do they want? And we'll apply Maslow. At the base level, they want tools to do their job. At the safety level, besides a paycheck, they want an environment of trust and safety. We talked about this. At the love and belonging level, they want a sense of connection. They don't just want to be a drone, a teller in a cube handing out money. They want to be part of a team. And this goes back to motivating context. Creating that day one mentality is a team thing. We're all living or operating in day one. They want a sense of self-esteem, which can be affected through recognition, appreciation, incentive models. They want to feel good about the work that they're doing. And then the last point is not my point. It's Daniel Pink's point, who's a fairly famous American author, writes a lot about human behavior in business and life. And he determined that what high-performing employees want is this. They want a sense of mastery, the ability to become excellent at their job, at their function, at their vocation. They want a sense of autonomy, which is to say freedom to make decisions, to have authority over what they do on a daily basis. And they want connection to purpose, which I mentioned earlier. They want the reason to go to work to be more than a paycheck or more than resume building. And this is particularly true in America, but I think it's increasingly true around the world. And it gets to the last part of the adaptation equation, purpose. And so here's the question. And this is the question I asked the panelists in Cairo. What should the purpose of your bank be? Or what should the purpose of a bank be? One guy said, to make money. Another guy said, distribute capital. And I'm like, I don't think that's enough. By the way, if you're trying to recruit the best and brightest to join your bank out of Harvard or out of Columbia or out of pick a great school, I don't think that's very compelling. Particularly when you're competing with some of these fintech, unicorns, or you're competing with Amazon, or you're competing with, Uber or whatever. You're competing with cool. You're competing with cool. And so purpose that is not cool, I don't know how well that competes. And so I could almost argue that the adaptation task, how to succeed at transformation in sort of an extended form adaptation, I think kind of begins and ends with redefining purpose. We've done that at FinTech Americas. Our intention is to be the knowledge company that enables the industry to self-actualize, to realize its full potential at a collective, corporate, and individual level. That's a very different purpose than the purpose we had 3 years ago. Is that fair?
Correct. At some point it was, okay, we'll do a conference, but really the mission, and there is so much to do.
This is my final slide to underscore why I think banks need to reset purpose. I'll let people read it. I'll read it. An Accenture study reveals that most consumers were satisfied with how their primary institution supported them through the pandemic, but only 29% trust them to look after their financial well-being. That means widespread digitization by the pandemic has come at a steep cost of trust, an area in which banks and credit unions. My concern about banks digitizing and commoditizing function and focus purely on product with no real consideration of the humans on the other side is it may increase efficiencies in the short term and maybe even relevance in the short term, but I think it exposes you terribly to disintermediation. The minute you lose trust, I mean, at the end of the day, a bank is a professional service business. And the minute you lose trust, connection between you and the customer, retail customer, consumer, or commercial customer, I fear you kind of begin to lose everything. And so to me, the purpose of the bank has to go to self-actualization, has to go to how do we help businesses and consumers realize the full potential of their life, the full potential of their business, the full potential of their career, whatever, which necessarily is connected to this idea of financial well-being. The last thing I'll say, it goes back to this DNA thing. This is a wonderful Einsteinism. No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. In a way, we created the transformation problem, but the way we solve it is not with the same level of consciousness. We have to go to a completely different place. We have to decode, and then we have to recode our DNA to be able to begin to think about this on a completely different plane, completely different dimension of the value that we're creating and the way we're going to create that value. So I think that's it. Amen. Woo-woo!
Here you're already getting comments that thank you, Chris. Great to hear you again. And if there is one thing that we can take out of this is perpetual adaptation.
Yeah,
I was a little bit shocked. Changing digital transformation. We've been talking so much about that, and as you see, it has been everywhere. So the community can expect that you will see a different messaging from FinTech Americas coming out of this, because this is what we do. We have to change and adapt to.
Yeah.
So
it's a much, to my mind, it's a much more dimensional and arguably complicated undertaking than this transformation effort. And you're like, but wait, Chris, 84% of transformation fails. So if adaptation is even harder, what's that going to look like? Mm-hmm. But I think if we can all agree that fundamentally this is a human first undertaking, and then it's actually both essential and exciting, that to learn how to become perfectly adaptive is to learn how to realize the full potential of self, the full potential of us as an organization, the full potential of our country, the full potential of our continent, the full potential of our species. I think we just lock on that, both as motivation and reality, human first. I think the failure rate goes down, the success rate goes up, and everybody wins. And as you said, FinTech Americas is committed to doing everything we can. That's why we created the professional development group. We're doing everything we can to support organizations at learning how to become perfectly adaptive. So
everybody wants to live at the top of the pyramid. Who wants to be at the bottom? Nobody wants to. Sometimes you need
Well, I think that's true and not true. I think a lot of people are afraid. A lot of organizations, like this whole purpose question, a lot of organizations will be afraid. But our job is to encourage and motivate and nudge and I think remind that I'm not sure. Not as a threat, because we know fear doesn't work. But I'm not sure not adapting is actually a choice. Mm-hmm. Anyway, to anybody on the call, if you ever want to have a conversation, Chris at fintechamericas.co. We are here to help the industry in whatever way we can. Don't be shy. Don't be fearful. Reach out. Happy to have a chat and help in whatever way I can. And Maria?
Yes.
Great to be with you today.
Thank you. I'm always, surprised that every time that you do a talk, someone comes from a financial institution and tells you, can you talk to my CEO? I always find that super interesting. And I'm always curious, what they want you to talk to their CEO. But yes.
Well, the answer is yes. In fact, we got a call recently, and I'm having one of those conversations, I think next 2 weeks out, right? I'm more than happy to talk to anybody in your organizations about how we, not me, how Think America views the journey ahead. And again, we can help you. We are here to help. So, okay.
Thank you, Chris.
Ciao, everybody.
Well, community, unfortunately, our time has running up. So thank you very much for participating. As always, as Joe said, you're going to receive a survey. Please complete it, because it really helps us to try to improve our programming for you, because you're our client. The other thing is Thursday, the 21st, we have our deep dive. The topic is going to be digital banking. We have executives from Banco Industrial, Pichincha, ADL Digital Labs, Banco Nacional de Bolivia, DOC, Swap, and more. So please try to make it. Thank you very, very much. Have a great weekend. And thank you for being part of the community of FinTech Americas. We really appreciate it. Thank you.